I don't remember the first time my mother stopped hearing me, only the quiet that settled in after she did. It started with small things: birthdays missed, phone calls unanswered, the way she looked through me when someone more accomplished walked into the room. Over the years, that quiet turned into a language between us, her indifference speaking louder than any insult could. At family gatherings, she'd smile when people praised my sister, then lower her voice when they asked about me, as if my name were a stain she needed to wipe away. I used to think it was easier to stay silent, to let her version of me exist, because fighting it never changed a thing. But something cracked that night, so clean, so final, that even I could hear it through the noise of my own restraint. I realized silence had stopped protecting me a long time ago. So I smiled back at her, calm and certain, and for the first time in years, I didn't swallow my words. They had no idea what that smile meant. They had no idea the story was about to turn. The music sounded elegant, but up close it felt rehearsed, an orchestra of forced laughter, champagne clinking, and the shallow rhythm of people pretending to belong. I stood near the far corner, the one place where I could watch without being watched. From here, I could see my mother glowing under the chandelier's golden light, hand in hand with her newest trophy, the man about to marry her favorite child. Hannah looked radiant, of course. She always did. She had that kind of beauty that made other people's insecurities feel like compliments. And next to her stood Commander Jack Vaughn, the evening's headline act. My mother spoke about him the way some people talk about divine intervention. Her words rippled through the crowd like gospel. Jack served in Yemen, she said, her tone solemn but proud. He almost didn't make it back. Her hand tightened around his arm, as if his valor were a medal she could wear. Then she turned, smiling toward me, her voice soft enough to sting. And this is my older daughter, Miriam. She works with computers. Something stable, I think. The crowd laughed politely, the kind of laughter people use when they don't know what else to do. I smiled, too. Not because I wanted to, but because that was my role. To absorb the noise so no one else had to feel the discomfort of it. Every family has its hierarchy, and I'd long accepted mine. Hannah was the legacy. I was the footnote. But then Jack's eyes found me. The chatter around us faded into static. He froze, just for a heartbeat, just long enough for me to notice. That recognition, that flash of memory, cut through the room like a misfired signal. His expression hardened before he forced a smile. But I had already seen it, the flicker of alarm in a soldier trained to conceal everything. I hadn't seen that face in years. Not since the dark-lit conference room where my decisions carried weight and silence could mean survival. I remembered the hum of monitors, the tension in the air before a mission went live. Back then, I was a voice over a secured line, and Jack Vaughn was a name under my command. Now, in a ballroom dressed in white roses and status, that same man stood next to my sister, acting as if we were strangers. I picked up my glass, letting the bubbles settle before taking a sip. My mother's voice kept floating across the room, louder, brighter, filling every space she could reach. She didn't see it, the way Jack avoided my gaze, or how my smile didn't reach my eyes. She never noticed anything that didn't sparkle. I slipped away from the crowd, weaving past servers, carrying trays of shrimp cocktail and forced laughter. Near the window, I finally let myself breathe. Washington lay stretched below, the city lights drawing clean, merciless lines between power and pretense. The reflection in the glass stared back at me. Calm, expressionless, a woman dressed in navy who'd learned to disappear in plain sight. Behind me, I could still hear my mother. Her laughter rose above the piano, sharp and polished. She'd spent her life hosting these kinds of rooms, curating perfection, trimming away anything that didn't fit her image. Somewhere along the way, she trimmed me out too. I heard footsteps approach, the slow, deliberate kind that carry a question no one wants to ask. I didn't turn. "Are you with the bride's side or the groom's?" a man said lightly, probably trying to make conversation. I smiled at the reflection instead of answering him directly. Both, I said, though I'm not sure either side remembers. He laughed, not realizing it wasn't a joke. From across the ballroom, I saw Jack glance in my direction again, this time with the subtle panic of someone realizing that the past had followed him into a room built entirely on illusion. His jaw tightened, his posture straighter than the men around him. Hannah leaned in to whisper something, and he nodded too quickly. He was trying to hide it, and I, after all these years, knew exactly how that felt. The chandelier lights blurred slightly in my vision. I didn't know if it was exhaustion or something deeper, something like clarity. For so long, I'd been content to stay silent, to keep their stories intact so mine wouldn't matter. But as I watched my mother hold court and my sister bask in admiration, I understood something simple and sharp. Silence had stopped keeping me safe. It was only keeping them comfortable. I set my glass down on the marble ledge and straightened my shoulders. Outside, the night pressed against the window, like a mirror of everything I'd buried. Tonight, the rules would shift. They just didn't know it yet. Every story demands a price. Mine was 20 years spent living as someone I wasn't. When I signed the papers for the agency, I understood what the words classified and confidential truly meant. They didn't just lock away information, they locked away the version of you that people once knew. Every detail of my life, what I did, where I went, who I spoke to, became something I could never share. So, I built a version of myself that could survive outside those walls. I told my family I worked in information technology for the Department of Energy. It was harmless, forgettable, something people could nod politely at before changing the subject. My mother loved that story. It sounded respectable enough for dinner parties, and boring enough that no one would ask for details. She'd smile as she said it, her favorite performance. My daughter works for the government, she'd tell her friends, chin high with pride she hadn't earned. It didn't matter that she didn't know which government office or what I actually did. What mattered was that it sounded polished. My father, the kind of man who could turn a conversation into a courtroom, would always follow with something sharp and deliberate. Once, during a family dinner that dragged on too long, he leaned back and said, "Hannah will carry the Goldstein name far. And you, Miriam, maybe you'll find a decent man, even if he's just another computer engineer." He said it like he was offering me advice, not a wound. I remember the silence after that, the sound of cutlery tapping plates, the rustle of napkins, normal sounds pretending not to hear cruelty. I smiled and said nothing. That was the rule in our house. Survive by silence. For years, that lie served its purpose. It kept me invisible, safe, detached from the chaos of family expectations. But safety comes with a cost. It erodes something inside you, grain by grain, until you start mistaking numbness for peace. There was a time before that numbness, a time when I believed connection could exist without consequences. 12 years ago, I fell in love with a man named Noah. He was a CIA field officer, sharp, calm, with a quiet humor that disarmed people before they realized how watchful he was. We met during a joint briefing, two professionals hiding behind acronyms and security clearances. He had a way of seeing through walls, through me. He never asked about my cover story. He didn't need to. In his world, we both understood that silence was another way of saying I trust you. We didn't make promises. People in our line of work never do. But he would leave me small notes, single words written on scraps of paper, tucked into files he knew I'd open. Stay steady. Come home. Then, one morning, a secure report crossed my desk marked human. Critical asset lost. It was his operation. I'd spent the night before reviewing the encryption for his data link. I thought it was flawless. It wasn't. They said the team walked into an ambush in Aleppo. The signal had been traced. He died before extraction. The official report listed the failure as technical. I read it 3 times, signed my acknowledgement, and filed it away like every other classified death I'd processed. That was the job. You didn't cry at work. Tears could leak what words shouldn't. But that night, alone in my apartment, I stared at the blinking cursor of an empty email draft I could never send and realized I'd traded honesty for competence and love for silence. From then on, I built walls even the agency couldn't design. My life became a formula: brief, debrief, sleep, repeat, coffee instead of breakfast, work instead of therapy. I learned to breathe only where no one could hear it. People mistook my restraint for coldness. They weren't wrong. Cold was safe. Cold didn't make mistakes. It was easier to let my family think I fixed printers and reset passwords. Easier to let them see a dull version of me than risk them glimpsing what I'd done, or what I'd lost. My mother called it humility. I called it penance. Over the years, the lie became muscle memory. When people asked what I did, my mouth moved before my mind did. Work, government systems, nothing exciting. The words fell out effortlessly, and I hated how natural they sounded. Sometimes, I'd imagine what Noah would say if he saw me now. He used to tease me for drinking my coffee black, said it made me look like I was trying too hard to prove I could handle bitterness. Maybe he was right. In a strange way, the lie I told them, the dull, tidy story about my life, was the same one I told myself. That if I stayed quiet enough, still enough, small enough, no one could ever bleed because of me again. For a long time, I believed that. Until the night my sister's engagement forced me back into a room full of people who thought they knew me. Until a man who once took orders from my voice looked me in the eye and pretended we were strangers. That was when the first crack appeared. Not loud, just a hairline fracture across the surface of everything I'd built. I didn't know it then, but the lie I let them tell was already running out of time. A week before my sister's engagement party, my name appeared on a clearance memo for an interbranch operation with the Navy. It was routine work, verifying personnel, ensuring everyone attached to the program had proper clearance and a clean record. I skimmed through the list mechanically, half distracted by the sound of rain tapping against my office window, until one name stopped me cold. Commander Jack Vaughn. The letters blurred for a moment before settling back into focus. I scrolled down and opened his personnel file. A familiar report flashed across the screen, one I had signed 3 years earlier. Operation Haven. Result: 2 casualties. Probation. Leadership under review. For a few seconds, I couldn't breathe. My pulse thudded in my ears as the memory resurfaced. The classified debrief. The sterile conference room in Norfolk. The photographs spread across the table. Jack Vaughn had been the team leader of an extraction unit in northern Somalia. A compromised signal led his men into an ambush. 2 never came home. He'd taken responsibility for the miscommunication, but the after-action review concluded it wasn't entirely his fault. The failure had been buried for morale's sake. The report was sealed, red-stamped, forgotten by everyone except those who'd written it. I'd been the one to sign it. And now, that same man was marrying my sister. I stared at the photograph attached to the file. It was standard issue, navy background, white uniform, ribbons aligned perfectly. His expression was taut, disciplined, the face of a man who knew the value of composure. But behind that practiced calm, I remembered the way he'd looked during the debrief years ago. Jaw locked, eyes hollowed by guilt, searching for someone to blame and realizing there was no one left. He didn't know who I was back then. My name wasn't on the operational chain. The director's signature block was deliberately redacted from his version of the file, but I'd been the one sitting in the dim light of that room, listening to the broken transmission, hearing the last words of 2 soldiers before the line went dead. Now, sitting at my desk, my reflection flickering faintly on the dark screen, I felt that old, quiet ache return, the one that always came before I had to make a decision that couldn't be undone. My first instinct was to recuse myself. I could have passed the review to another department and pretended I never saw the name. It would have been easy. No one would question it. But then I imagined my sister, Hannah, standing next to him, smiling for photos, oblivious to the weight of the man beside her. I could already hear my mother's voice turning his military career into family currency. I closed the file and leaned back, the leather chair creaking under the weight of things I didn't say. That night, my phone rang. My mother's voice filled the room, sweet and sharp as ever. "Miriam, you're coming to the party, right? Don't say you're busy. This time, you'll show up. And please, don't talk about politics or defense or any of those grim things you do. Jack's a man of action. He prefers people who keep things light." Her words weren't new. I'd heard variations of them my entire life, but something in the way she said "man of action" made my skin crawl. I stared at the dark window while she kept talking, her sentences blurring into one long performance about family unity and appearances. When she finally hung up, I sat in silence, phone still in my hand. My reflection stared back at me from the glass, tired, distant, unrecognizable. For years, I'd convinced myself that staying quiet was a form of protection, that if I played along, kept their illusions intact, no one would get hurt. But looking at that reflection now, I realized the truth. I hadn't been protecting myself. I'd been protecting their comfort. Their version of me was easier to live with than the real one. The thought hit harder than I expected. I stood and crossed the small apartment, the sound of rain still faint on the windows. My uniform hung in the closet, untouched for months. I reached for something else instead, the simple navy dress my mother hated, the one she said made me look severe. Under the soft lamplight, I smoothed the collar, tracing the fabric between my fingers. It wasn't fancy, but it was honest. For years, I'd let them believe their lie because it cost me less than the truth. But lies always collect interest, and mine had been accumulating for decades. Tomorrow night, I would walk into that ballroom as the woman they thought they understood, and let their own fiction unravel right in front of them. Not out of revenge, not even for justice, but because I was done carrying a silence that only served other people. If they wanted to see who I was, I'd give them that. Not in words, not in explanations, just enough truth to make the room go still. There are moments in life when light stops being beautiful. When it doesn't illuminate, it exposes. I used to think stage lights belonged to performers, to people who wanted to be seen. But that night, I learned how cruel light can be when it lands on the wrong person. The music cut out mid-verse, and the DJ's voice faded as a single spotlight found the center of the ballroom. My mother, Elaine, stepped into it as if she'd rehearsed her entire life for that moment. The crowd quieted, waiting for her. She raised one manicured hand, a queen before her court. "Thank you all for coming." Her voice boomed through the speakers. "Tonight, we celebrate my youngest daughter, Hannah Goldstein, and her brave fiancé, Commander Jack Vaughn." Applause thundered across the room. Glasses clinked. Someone shouted to the happy couple. I stayed seated, my smile fixed, my hands still. Then my mother's gaze slid toward me. She squinted through the light, finding me near the edge of the room, and something playful curved her lips. "And over there," she added, "our very own tech genius, my eldest, Miriam. She works with computers at the Department of Energy. Such an important job. I bet she could fix the hotel printer if it jammed tonight." Laughter rippled through the room, polite and poisonous. My chest tightened. My heartbeat drummed behind my ears like a warning I'd ignored too many times before. Every insult from every year seemed to condense into that one moment. It wasn't the joke. It was the familiarity of it, the way she turned me into a prop for her charm. Something harmless, something small. I'd always let her. But then I saw Jack. He was standing close to the stage, a champagne flute in his hand. His smile faltered. The glass trembled, liquid catching the light. His eyes locked on mine across the room, and in that instant, the noise around us disappeared. Recognition, shock, and fear. The same kind of fear that doesn't come from embarrassment or confusion, but from memory. His lips parted, soundless. And though no one else could hear it, I knew what he'd mouthed. Director Goldstein. The breath caught in my throat. I shook my head slightly, an instinct born from years of secrecy. But he wasn't looking for permission. His hand slipped. The glass hit the marble floor. exploding into 100 shards. The crack echoed like gunfire. People gasped. Heads turned. Jack straightened. The instinct of a soldier took over. Rigid spine, squared shoulders, eyes forward. His voice cut through the confusion, sharp and commanding. "Director Goldstein, ma'am, Admiral-level clearance." The words ricocheted through the hall. They didn't just break the silence, they shattered it. For a split second, no one moved. The air froze, caught between disbelief and comprehension. I could feel hundreds of eyes turning toward me. I rose slowly, pulse steady now. Years of training kept my expression still. The discipline that had carried me through briefing rooms and classified chaos suddenly anchoring me in this glittering, ridiculous ballroom. At ease. "Commander," I said quietly. My voice didn't rise above the music, but it didn't need to. It sliced through the room all the same. Every conversation, every laugh, every breath halted. The pianist's hand hovered mid-air above the keys. My mother laughed first, too high, too nervous. "Oh, Jack, what a sense of humor you have. Always the prankster." But Jack didn't smile. His voice broke slightly when he spoke again. "No, ma'am. She's not joking. She's my superior. The one who authorized Operation Haven." The words dropped like stones into still water. Ripples of whispers spread through the guests. The chandelier light fractured across the polished floor, throwing harsh reflections that flickered over every face. Hannah's hand fell from her fiancé's arm. Her eyes darted from him to me, wide, uncomprehending. My mother's face drained of color. For once, she had no performance left to give. I stood perfectly still, the hum of blood in my ears drowning out the rest. I didn't feel triumphant, just tired. This was never a victory. It was exposure. Part of me wanted to turn, to walk out and let them choke on their confusion. But another part, the one that had sat through every family dinner filled with jabs disguised as jokes, told me to stay. So I did. I met my mother's eyes across the room. She looked at me like a stranger, searching for a version of her daughter that had never existed. The silence between us stretched, heavy and final. Jack remained at attention, eyes forward, as if waiting for orders. I almost pitied him. His life, his lie, had just collided with mine in the worst possible way. The DJ fumbled to restart the music, but it was too late. The illusion had already been broken. The guests started murmuring again, soft, uncertain, afraid to pick a side. Someone whispered director, like it was a forbidden word. Someone else tried to laugh it off and failed. Under the glittering lights, surrounded by champagne and shame, I realized I'd stopped feeling small. My mother once told me that real power was knowing when to smile and say nothing. She never understood that silence isn't always submission. Sometimes, it's a warning. That night, my silence spoke louder than she ever had. And I didn't look away. The room didn't breathe. It just hung there, suspended between disbelief and revelation. Somewhere in the back, the sound of champagne dripping from shattered glass tapped against the marble floor like a metronome marking the end of a lie. My mother broke first. She always did when silence made her nervous. Her laugh sliced through the stillness, high-pitched, off-key, desperate. "Oh, Miriam, you certainly know how to make an impression. And Jack, what a performance!" The crowd followed her lead, a few scattered chuckles, the kind of laughter that dies halfway up the throat. I didn't move. I didn't need to. Her words hung there, empty, like balloons losing helium. I looked at her, not angry, not even humiliated anymore, just tired. There was a strange tenderness in my exhaustion. She still believed she could steer this room, bend it back to her narrative like she always did. She didn't see that her stage had already collapsed beneath her. Jack took a step back. His face was pale under the chandelier light, jaw trembling. He stood ramrod straight, his voice rough and unsteady. "Ma'am, this is no joke. She's the reason I came home alive." The murmur that followed was quiet, disbelieving. Hannah gasped softly, a sound so small it barely made it across the air between us. Someone near the bar whispered my name like a question, and for the first time, people looked at me not as the overlooked sister or the quiet daughter, but as someone they didn't recognize at all. I met Jack's gaze. I could see the sweat collecting at his temple, the way his discipline was fighting with panic. I spoke slowly, evenly, the same tone I'd used in a dozen security briefings that determined whether people lived or died. Thank you, Commander. Congratulations on your engagement. That should have been the end. A simple line to close the file and walk away. But nothing ever ends neatly in my family. As I turned to leave, I felt her hand clamp around my wrist. My mother's grip was tighter than I expected. When I faced her, she smiled, wide and brittle, and hissed under her breath, loud enough for only me. Why didn't you tell me? You could have been the pride of this family. We could have invited the Secretary of Defense. Her eyes glistened, not with pride, but with greed, the same shine that used to make me feel small when I was younger. I slipped my hand free. What I do isn't for display, I said quietly, and my life isn't a prop for your parties. Her mouth opened, ready to argue, but nothing came out. The power she'd always had in words had finally deserted her. Jack was still standing at attention, hands trembling slightly. His voice cracked as he spoke again. Ma'am, am I in violation of protocol? I didn't know who you were. It wasn't guilt I heard in him. It was the naked fear of a man who had built his career on control and had just lost all of it in front of everyone. I almost pitied him. Almost. I cut him off softly, my voice low but sharp enough to hold the room in place. You're fine, Commander. But remember this next time, real honor doesn't need to be announced. The words dropped into the air like a stone into water, rippling outward. You could feel it, the hush that comes when people realize something sacred just shifted. Heads bowed instinctively. Phones went up anyway. I saw the faint glow of a camera flash from somewhere in the back. Others quietly gathered their coats, too embarrassed or afraid to stay. The music never came back on. The laughter didn't either. I walked toward the exit slowly, every step echoing through the hollow silence. No one stopped me. No one dared. The elevator waited at the end of the hall, its polished metal doors reflecting the chandeliers behind me. Just before stepping in, I turned slightly and caught sight of her, my mother, frozen in the middle of the ballroom, surrounded by the wreckage of her own performance. Her hand still held the microphone, her face pale, eyes wide and vacant. The lights still glimmered above her, bright and merciless, scattering across the floor like shards of the life she'd built on appearances. But I knew what she didn't yet. That light no longer belonged to her. As the elevator doors closed, her reflection lingered in the thin line of metal until it disappeared. The descent was silent. For the first time that evening, I realized how steady my hands felt. Not triumphant, not shaking, just steady, like someone who had finally stopped holding her breath. Outside, the night air hit me like truth, cold, clean, absolute. And with it came a strange calm, the kind that comes when the worst thing imaginable has already happened, and you're still standing. Behind me, somewhere above those glittering chandeliers, the story my mother tried to tell had collapsed, and for the first time in a long time, the quiet belonged to me. I left the engagement early, stepping out into the sharp winter air before the laughter inside could turn back into gossip. The city lights outside the hay Adams were steady and indifferent, and I told myself that by morning, everything would fade back into silence. It didn't. 3 hours later, my phone lit up like an alarm. Text messages, emails, missed calls, each one piling on top of the other. By the time I opened the first one, it was already too late. A tweet was making the rounds. Breaking, DIA senior official, spotted at D.C. engagement party, rumored superior of Navy SEAL hero Jack Vaughn. By dawn, it had been reposted thousands of times. I scrolled without blinking, reading my own name buried beneath the words classified. High-ranking, female director. Someone had caught a picture, a blur of navy blue and light, barely recognizable, but enough to start a storm. The phone rang again. My mother's voice hit before I could say hello. Miriam, what on earth is happening? You're on the news. They're saying you work for the defense. Oh my God, why didn't you tell me sooner? We could have invited the governor. I closed my eyes. The phone pressed loosely to my ear. Her excitement cut through any sense of caution. For her, even scandal was opportunity. This isn't something to celebrate, I said evenly. That's exactly why I never mentioned it. She didn't hear me, or refused to. It's amazing. Miriam! Imagine what this could do for Hannah's reputation. For all of us. You've been hiding for no reason. But she didn't understand. She never would. To her, visibility was power. To me, it was danger. By noon, an internal message from the DIA arrived on my secured line. Subject, incident report, unauthorized exposure at civilian event. The tone was formal, detached, surgical, submit written report, detail exposure circumstances, risk level, pending review. I opened a blank document and began typing what I'd typed 100 times before for other people's mistakes. No malicious intent, civilian environment, containment pending. Every word was true and meaningless at the same time. I knew the procedure. The next steps were predictable. Temporary clearance freeze, internal security audit, then a series of interviews where my composure would be measured more than my answers. It wasn't the investigation that unsettled me. It was what came after. The way people in my line of work began to look at you differently, as if your silence had suddenly become suspicious. That afternoon, my assistant knocked on my office door. There's someone asking to see you, ma'am. Civilian visitor. But he says it's urgent. I already knew who it was before she spoke the name. Jack Vaughn stood in the hallway outside my office, dressed in civilian clothes that couldn't disguise his discomfort. His hair was slightly unkempt, his eyes bloodshot. When I gestured for him to come in, he hesitated at the threshold, as if unsure whether he was welcome. He didn't sit until I told him to. The conference room we moved to was windowless, lit by the kind of sterile fluorescent light that drained color out of everything. The hum of the air conditioner was the only sound. He cleared his throat, voice rough. Ma'am, I didn't mean to. What happened at the party, it wasn't intentional. I just didn't know what to do when I saw you. I said nothing. He went on, his words tumbling faster. The way soldiers speak when formality starts to crack. When I looked up and saw you there, it all came back. The voice from the radio during Operation Haven, the orders, the silence afterward. I didn't think, God. I didn't think it was you. I let the confession settle between us. Then I asked quietly, Are you afraid of being exposed, or of being reminded? He looked down, his hands clenched on the metal table. Both. That single word landed heavier than he intended. It was the first honest thing he'd said since we sat down. In that moment, I saw not the decorated seal that my family worshipped, but the man behind the medals, a man who carried shame like a secret wound, the kind who feared memory more than consequence. You don't need to worry, I said finally. I don't speak about operations. Not then, not now. His shoulders eased slightly, but I didn't stop there. But do yourself a favor. Commander, don't turn failure into a story you use to impress someone else. He looked up sharply, but there was no anger, only something close to regret. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was weighted, almost reverent. For years, he'd worn that uniform like armor. Now, without it, he looked smaller, more human. I realized then that his fear wasn't of me or the agency, it was of himself. You know, I said after a long pause, it's strange. The people who shout about honor the loudest are usually the ones trying to convince themselves they still have it. He swallowed hard. His hands flexed against the table, the faint tremor betraying what his voice didn't. When he finally spoke, it was barely above a whisper. I didn't deserve the way they praised me after Haven. I know that. I nodded once. Then stop living like you did. The fluorescent light flickered overhead. buzzing like an old wire about to give out. Neither of us moved for a long while. Outside the room, I could hear the faint sound of footsteps in the corridor, junior analysts rushing between briefings, living inside the machinery of secrecy I had built my entire life around. And yet, right there, across from a man who had nearly destroyed his own career, I felt something crack open, something quiet and familiar. He wasn't dangerous anymore. He was just lost. When the meeting ended, Jack stood and saluted. Not the rigid Mulder's public gesture from that ballroom, but a muted, awed, private one. I didn't return it. As he turned to leave, I said, almost to myself, "Don't confuse silence with safety. It's how most people disappear." He stopped at the door, but didn't look back. After he left, I sat alone in the humming cold of that room. The report file on my desk still glowed faintly on the monitor, cursor blinking like a heartbeat. Somewhere out there, my mother was probably still on the phone, telling anyone who'd listen that her daughter was in the news. She'd never understand that visibility was a threat, not an honor. I saved the report and locked the screen. My reflection in the glass looked pale, drained, but unflinching. The investigation had begun. The storm had broken. And for the first time since that night, I felt the weight of silence shifting, no longer a shield, but a reckoning waiting to arrive. I thought it was over after Jack left my office. I thought the silence that followed would be the kind I could live with, the kind that fades into the background until you forget what caused it. But the next afternoon, my doorbell rang, and the familiar rhythm of it told me exactly who was on the other side before I even looked. When I opened the door, they were both there, my mother and Hannah, standing together in a way I had never seen before. They looked like allies, or maybe like people forced into alliance by fear. My mother's posture was impeccable as always, but her face was pale, brittle. Hannah, beside her, looked smaller than usual, as if holding herself upright cost more effort than she had to give. My mother spoke first, her voice polished and cold. "What are you doing?" "Miriam," she said, "do you realize what you've done to us? The wedding's been postponed. People are talking. You've turned this family into a spectacle." I stood aside, letting them in because it was too cold to argue in the hallway. They didn't wait for permission. They brushed past me, bringing the sharp scent of winter air and expensive perfume into the apartment. I closed the door quietly. "I'm not doing anything," I said finally. "The truth is..." She blinked, momentarily thrown off by the simplicity of it. My mother was used to battles fought with explanation and apology. She didn't know what to do with composure. Hannah stepped forward before our mother could recover. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her cheeks blotched. There was a tremor in her hands as she clutched the strap of her purse like it could hold her steady. "Why are you doing this to us?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Why him? Why now?" I met her eyes. "Why not now?" "Because you hate me," she said, louder this time. "That's it, isn't it? You've always hated me." It would have been easier to let her believe that. Hatred is simple. It gives people something to fight against. But hate had nothing to do with this. "I don't hate you," I said softly. "You're my sister." "Then why humiliate him like that? He was trying to protect you, and you turned him into a joke." I looked at her for a long time before answering. "Do you know what Operation Haven was?" She frowned, confused but confident, repeating the story she'd been told. "Of course. It was one of his missions. He saved people there." "No, Hannah, that's not what happened." I walked to my desk, opened the top drawer, and pulled out a thick envelope, one I had hoped never to open again. I set it down on the table between us. The edges were frayed, the seal still intact, but the weight of it carried the past like lead. "That's the report," I said. "The truth." Her expression faltered. She reached out, hesitated. "What is it?" "It's where he lost 2 men," I said quietly. "Because of a transmission error, because he made a call too soon." The words hung there, heavier than I meant them to. I was the one who signed the investigation. She shook her head, her denial reflexive. "No, That's not possible. He told me. He told me. Her hand brushed against a wineglass sitting on the edge of the table. It toppled. The red liquid spread across the pale wood, bleeding into the envelope before dripping onto her dress. A slow crimson bloom spread across the white fabric. And for a moment, she just stared at it like she didn't recognize her own reflection. "You can't bring that here," she said, voice breaking. "That's military. You can't." My mother's voice cut in, sharp and desperate. "She's right. You'll destroy him. Miriam, you'll destroy us." I turned to her, feeling something cold settle into place where empathy used to be. "No, Mother, this isn't about destruction. It's about conscience." She flinched, as if the word itself was indecent. Before she could reply, there was a knock at the open door behind them, and then he was there. Jack stepped inside slowly, as if afraid to cross the threshold. He wasn't wearing his uniform, just a plain shirt, sleeves rolled up, eyes hollow. The silence between us was a living thing. He looked at Hannah. Not me. She's telling the truth. Hannah's breath caught. The words hit her like a physical blow. "What are you saying?" she whispered. He didn't move closer. His shoulders sagged as if the effort of standing upright was too much. "I'm not a hero. Hannah, I made mistakes. People died because of them." My mother gasped softly, the sound small but sharp. Her hand flew to her chest as if she could hold the world still by force of will. No one spoke for several seconds. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator, the muffled noise of traffic outside. I took a slow breath. "I didn't call either of you here to argue. I wanted you to know the truth before you stand in front of an altar built on lies." Hannah shook her head, her tears falling freely now. She looked at Jack, searching his face for the version of him she'd believed in, and finding nothing there but exhaustion. "Stop," she said. "Just stop." "This isn't happening." But it was. The truth doesn't wait for comfort. My mother found her voice again, though it trembled. "You've made your point. You've embarrassed us enough. What more do you want? To be the center of attention? To make us small?" I turned to her, meeting her gaze squarely. "No, Mother. I just wanted to see myself, without your light distorting the view." Her face changed then. Something cracked behind the anger, the first trace of fear I'd ever seen in her. She looked away before she could stop herself. I walked to the door and opened it. Cold air swept into the apartment, carrying the faint metallic scent of snow. "You should go," I said quietly. For a moment, no one moved. Then Jack nodded once, wordless, and slipped past my mother. His footsteps were heavy, final. My mother followed, muttering something I didn't catch. Hannah lingered. She stood there, eyes rimmed with red, her voice small and hoarse. "You always make everything about right and wrong," she said. "About principles. Maybe that's why no one can stay close to you." "Maybe," I said. "But principles are what's left when the people you love choose lies instead." She stared at me for a long moment, then brushed past, her shoulder grazing mine as she left. When the door closed behind them, the silence returned, but it wasn't the same as before. It was heavier, thicker, full of echoes. I leaned against the door, letting my forehead rest against the wood. Through the stillness, I could hear their footsteps fading down the hall. Soft at first, then gone. The apartment was dim, the last of the daylight slipping through the blinds. The red wine on the table had dried to a dark stain. I stared at it, the edges already turning brown, and thought of all the years I'd spent pretending that truth could coexist with peace. It couldn't. I picked up the envelope and wiped the corner clean. The paper inside was dry. Facts survive what feelings can't. I placed it back into the drawer and locked it. Outside. The city exhaled, sirens in the distance, the steady pulse of traffic, life moving forward without hesitation. For the first time, I didn't feel invisible. I felt exposed, raw, stripped bare of the comfort of pretending. And yet, somewhere deep inside, beneath the wreckage of loyalty and guilt, There was a quiet relief. It wasn't victory. It wasn't forgiveness. It was simply the truth, standing where it belonged. And for me, that was enough. I thought it was over after Jack left my office. I thought the silence that followed would be the kind I could live with, the kind that fades into the background until you forget what caused it. But the next afternoon, my doorbell rang, and the familiar rhythm of it told me exactly who was on the other side before I even looked. When I opened the door, they were both there, my mother and Hannah, standing together in a way I had never seen before. They looked like allies, or maybe like people forced into alliance by fear. My mother's posture was impeccable as always, but her face was pale, brittle. Hannah, beside her, looked smaller than usual, as if holding herself upright cost more effort than she had to give. My mother spoke first, her voice polished and cold. "What are you doing? Miriam," she said, "do you realize what you've done to us? The wedding's been postponed. People are talking. You've turned this family into a spectacle." I stood aside, letting them in because it was too cold to argue in the hallway. They didn't wait for permission. They brushed past me, bringing the sharp scent of winter air and expensive perfume into the apartment. I closed the door quietly. "I'm not doing anything," I said finally. "The truth is," she blinked, momentarily thrown off by the simplicity of it. My mother was used to battles fought with explanation and apology. She didn't know what to do with composure. Hannah stepped forward before our mother could recover. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her cheeks blotched. There was a tremor in her hands as she clutched the strap of her purse like it could hold her steady. "Why are you doing this to us?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Why him? Why now?" I met her eyes. "Why not now?" "Because you hate me," she said, louder this time. "That's it, isn't it? You've always hated me." It would have been easier to let her believe that. Hatred is simple. It gives people something to fight against. But hate had nothing to do with this. "I don't hate you," I said softly. "You're my sister." "Then why humiliate him like that? He was trying to protect you, and you turned him into a joke." I looked at her for a long time before answering. "Do you know what Operation Haven was?" She frowned, confused but confident, repeating the story she'd been told. "Of course. It was one of his missions. He saved people there." "No. Hannah, that's not what happened." I walked to my desk, opened the top drawer, and pulled out a thick envelope, one I had hoped never to open again. I set it down on the table between us. The edges were frayed, the seal still intact, but the weight of it carried the past like lead. "That's the report," I said, the truth. Her expression faltered. She reached out, hesitated. "What is it?" "It's where he lost 2 men," I said quietly, "because of a transmission error, because he made a call too soon." The words hung there, heavier than I meant them to. "I was the one who signed the investigation." She shook her head, her denial reflexive. "No, that's not possible. He told me. Her hand brushed against a wineglass sitting on the edge of the table. It toppled. The red liquid spread across the pale wood, bleeding into the envelope before dripping onto her dress. A slow crimson bloom spread across the white fabric, and for a moment, she just stared at it like she didn't recognize her own reflection. "You can't bring that here," she said, voice breaking. "That's military. You can't." My mother's voice cut in, sharp and desperate. "She's right. You'll destroy him. Miriam, you'll destroy us." I turned to her, feeling something cold settle into place where empathy used to be. "No, Mother, this isn't about destruction. It's about conscience." She flinched, as if the word itself was indecent. Before she could reply, there was a knock at the open door behind them. And then he was there. Jack stepped inside slowly, as if afraid to cross the threshold. He wasn't wearing his uniform, just a plain shirt, sleeves rolled up, eyes hollow. The silence between us was a living thing. He looked at Hannah. "Not me. She's telling the truth." Hannah's breath caught. The words hit her like a physical blow. "What are you saying?" she whispered. He didn't move closer. His shoulders sagged, as if the effort of standing upright was too much. I'm not a hero. Hannah, I made mistakes. People died because of them. My mother gasped softly, the sound small but sharp. Her hand flew to her chest, as if she could hold the world still by force of will. No one spoke for several seconds. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator, the muffled noise of traffic outside. I took a slow breath. I didn't call either of you here to argue. I wanted you to know the truth before you stand in front of an altar built on lies. Hannah shook her head, her tears falling freely now. She looked at Jack, searching his face for the version of him she'd believed in, and finding nothing there but exhaustion. Stop, she said. Just stop. This isn't happening. But it was. The truth doesn't wait for comfort. My mother found her voice again, though it trembled. You've made your point. You've embarrassed us enough? What more do you want? To be the center of attention? To make us small? I turned to her, meeting her gaze squarely. No, Mother, I just wanted to see myself, without your light distorting the view. Her face changed then. Something cracked behind the anger. The first trace of fear I'd ever seen in her. She looked away before she could stop herself. I walked to the door and opened it. Cold air swept into the apartment, carrying the faint metallic scent of snow. You should go, I said quietly. For a moment, no one moved. Then Jack nodded once, wordless, and slipped past my mother. His footsteps were heavy, final. My mother followed, muttering something I didn't catch. Hannah lingered. She stood there, eyes rimmed with red, her voice small and hoarse. You always make everything about right and wrong, she said. About principles. Maybe that's why no one can stay close to you. Maybe, I said. But principles are what's left when the people you love choose lies instead. She stared at me for a long moment, then brushed past, her shoulder grazing mine as she left. When the door closed behind them, the silence returned. But it wasn't the same as before. It was heavier, thicker, full of echoes. I leaned against the door, letting my forehead rest against the wood. Through the stillness, I could hear their footsteps fading down the hall, soft at first, then gone. The apartment was dim, the last of the daylight slipping through the blinds. The red wine on the table had dried to a dark stain. I stared at it, the edges already turning brown, and thought of all the years I'd spent pretending that truth could coexist with peace. It couldn't. I picked up the envelope and wiped the corner clean. The paper inside was dry. Facts survive what feelings can't. I placed it back into the drawer and locked it. Outside, the city exhaled, sirens in the distance, the steady pulse of traffic, life moving forward without hesitation. For the first time, I didn't feel invisible. I felt exposed, raw, stripped bare of the comfort of pretending. And yet, somewhere deep inside, beneath the wreckage of loyalty and guilt, there was a quiet relief. It wasn't victory. It wasn't forgiveness. It was simply the truth, standing where it belonged. And for me, that was enough. 2 days after the wedding, the email arrived. Subject, follow-up on exposure incident. Report required. I had known it was coming. The only surprise was how calm I felt when I saw it. The line of text was clinical, detached, like all the others that had marked my life in the Defense Intelligence Agency. Bureaucracy has a way of softening consequences until you almost forget they can cut. That morning, Virginia was wrapped in fog thick enough to erase the skyline. I drove toward Langley, with the headlights slicing through the mist, the hum of the engine steady beneath the silence. The road wound through a stretch of trees stripped bare by winter, their black branches tangled against the pale light. The DIA complex emerged like something carved from steel and shadow, unmoving, impersonal. I parked, flashed my badge, passed through security, and followed the echo of my own footsteps down the corridor. Inside the debriefing room, 3 senior officers and 1 legal advisor waited behind a long metal table. Their faces were practiced masks, polite but unreadable. Files were stacked neatly in front of them, stamped in red. Internal review, level 5 clearance. The officer in the middle, a man I'd worked with for years, adjusted his glasses before speaking. Director Goldstein, the event in D.C. has drawn public attention. We need your statement for the official record. His tone was even deliberate. Nothing in it betrayed judgment. But I knew how this worked. They were measuring not just my words, but my composure. I folded my hands on the table. There's nothing to add, sir. All data remains secure. My identity was compromised by another party, not through my actions. A brief pause. The sound of a pen clicking. Someone typed notes into a laptop. Understood, he said. Then, after a glance at the others, he continued, for the record, we've determined the breach was unintentional. However, given the nature of your clearance, protocol demands suspension of all non-essential civilian contact. He paused, as if waiting for a reaction. I gave him none. This will include family. The words landed softly, but their weight filled the room. I nodded once. I didn't ask for clarification. There was nothing to clarify. I'd known from the moment that photo surfaced online that this would be the outcome. The agency protects what it builds, even if it means dismantling the people inside it. They slid the report toward me. I read through it quickly, standard phrasing, nothing emotional. The final line was simple, directive enforced immediately upon signature. I picked up my pen. It was the same pen Noah once used. Black ink, heavy brass casing, worn at the grip. I'd kept it all these years, though I couldn't explain why. Maybe because it still worked flawlessly. Maybe because it was proof that some things endure. When the nib touched paper, I felt the faint vibration of finality. My name appeared in ink, clean and exact. As I lifted the pen, I realized I'd just signed away the last thread tying me to the life outside those walls. The officer nodded, satisfied. Thank you. Director, you'll receive formal notice within 48 hours. I stood, gathered my coat, and walked out without looking back. Outside, the fog hadn't lifted. It clung to everything, the pavement, the bare trees, the edges of the world. I drove back in silence, the radio off, the rhythmic click of the turn signal louder than I remembered. By the time I reached my apartment, the voicemail icon was blinking. I didn't need to listen to know who it was. When I called back, my mother answered on the first ring. Her voice was unsteady, the anger from our last conversation replaced by something else. Miriam, they said you can't see us anymore. Is that true? Yes, I said. There was a pause, then a shaky breath. But that's absurd. You're my daughter. There must be a way. There isn't. It's better this way. It keeps everyone safe. Safe, she repeated, like the word meant nothing to her. For her, safety was the absence of embarrassment, not danger. The silence stretched. Then came a sound I didn't expect. A quiet exhale, almost a sigh, and the click of the line ending. I sat with the phone still in my hand, the empty tone buzzing in my ear. For a moment, I thought I'd feel grief, but what came instead was stillness. That evening, I returned to the office to clear my personal drawer. There wasn't much to take: an old mug, a photo of a mountain range from a training trip years ago, and the pen, always the pen. I held it up to the light. The metal caught a faint reflection from the window, the color of dusk settling over the Potomac. For a moment, I saw the city beyond the glass, monuments, bridges, everything moving quietly under a sky turning silver gray. I remembered something Noah once said after a mission that nearly went wrong. He was bleeding, half laughing, and still found breath to tell me, the hardest missions are the ones that make you invisible. At the time, I thought he meant operational cover. Now I understood. He'd been talking about this, the slow erasure that comes with serving something larger than yourself until there's nothing left to claim as your own. I capped the pen and placed it in my coat pocket. It felt heavier than before. The next morning, I reported to headquarters one last time. I handed over my access badge, my secure phone, my encrypted drive. The security officer, A young woman who couldn't have been more than 26 looked at me with quiet sympathy as she collected them. She didn't say goodbye, just nodded, as if she understood that some exits don't need words. When I stepped outside, the cold air burned my lungs. The fog was lifting now, and sunlight spilled weakly through it, turning the sky a dull silver. I stood there for a while, watching it, my breath ghosting in front of me. No one would write my name in a headline again. No one would applaud or whisper or ask questions. That was the price. And the privilege. Freedom. I realized, wasn't about being seen. It was about having nothing left to hide. As I walked to my car, I slipped my hand into my pocket, fingers brushing the cool brass of Noah's pen. It was the only thing I kept, and the only thing that still knew both versions of me. The old one, who lived behind silence, and the new one, who had finally stopped apologizing for it. A year later, life had quieted into something steady, almost sacred. The mirrored glass of Langley reflected nothing but sky and the faint shimmer of morning haze. Inside, the hallways felt like memory, measured footsteps, muted voices, the hum of fluorescent light that never truly slept. No one here knew I was Elaine Goldstein's daughter. They only knew my title, the weight of it, the rhythm of decisions that could shift the balance of life's oceans away. Around here, names mattered less than precision. Respect came not from applause, but from the silence that followed your command. It was a March afternoon when the envelope arrived, a soft white square laid neatly atop my case files. My assistant must have thought it was personal and left it untouched. The handwriting was familiar. Hannah and Jack Vaughn. Wedding celebration. Inside was a silver-edged invitation printed on thick linen stock. At the bottom, embossed in soft gray, were the words, "Family always finds its way home." I sat back, letting the light from the window fall across the card. For a moment, I could see Hannah's face again, not the tear-streaked one from that night, but the younger version, sunburned and laughing on the shore of Lake Michigan. There had been a time when we believed the world was small enough to fit inside that summer. I opened the top drawer of my desk and pulled out a single photograph. 2 girls, barefoot on the sand, their hands clasped, their shadows stretching long across the water. I slipped it into the envelope, then took my pen, the one that had outlived everything, and wrote just 2 lines. Regrets. Classified engagement. The phrase was deliberate. 2 meanings folded into one. Classified, because my life belonged to secrets. Engagement, because some ties, once broken, aren't meant to be restored. I sealed the envelope and addressed it to my mother's house. Then I shut down my terminal, powered off the desk lamp, and gathered my coat. Outside, the wind off the Potomac carried the faint scent of rain. The river moved slow and sure beneath the fading light. I stood for a moment, watching the water catch the sunset, gold, silver, then gray again. No one said thank you. No one clapped. And I realized I didn't need them to. Some people are remembered through applause, others through silence. I've learned that freedom isn't standing in the light, it's walking away from it. I smiled to myself and kept walking. No more chandeliers, no more mirrors. Just the sound of the river and the quiet certainty of being free.